The one thing, I don't know if Linda mentioned this or not about our friend Kelly, but not only did she get front row, but she got front row center. I mean, they had like 13 chairs in the front. She was number 7 chair, right square. And after Mr. Goff gave his speech, he came 2 seats over from where she was at. His entourage started where she was sitting. So it was Bob Goff's 2 daughters, his wife, and then him. So she was sitting, and at one point during the concert, I went over to her and just to see how she was doing. I said, "How you doing?" And she's just like going, "This is the most amazing night of my life. This is just, I mean, you guys," and it's just like, it's not us, it's God. It's God, and we can't take anything. We just take what God gives us. And that leads me to what we're going to speak about today a little bit. I don't know if you guys go out in the morning or not. Take a look at the morning sky. I have a dog that's very hungry first thing in the morning, so I'm out before the sun is up. And the last few mornings, if you look to the east, and not that I'm an astrologer, but Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars are all starting to kind of align, or they have been aligned. And it's like this in ministry sometimes, is where things align themselves in a perfect order. First it was the Youth Workers Conference, and 2 speeches, one that was given by a pastor named Harvey Carey, and then Bob Goff's speech about being bold, about stepping out into boldness and stepping out from your comfort zone, stepping out into something that you don't know. And that's what I love about Linda right now, is she was doing something that was very much out of her comfort zone. And yet she stood up and she stepped out into her boldness and did that. The second thing was the speeches that were given. And then as we came home, one of the things that we had been wrestling with for a long time was whether or not we should show this video to the youth kids about witnessing to other people and other things. And it's a video by a man named Ray Comfort. And he was witnessing to alternative lifestyle couples and people like that, and not in a way that's making accusations, but yet in a way that is very much polite, yet he proves his point, he shows the Bible, he shows what it's all about. In that boldness, he's stepping out, but in a way that is nice. And then Reuben challenging us, saying, "Can you do something about that?" So all these things are aligning, so that's why we're here today. And what happened after Wednesday night's youth group was, as I was sitting there looking at being bold and what it means to be bold, I started to see an acronym. And you all know what an acronym is. It's a word that you take and you put other words to it. And bold, to me, started to look like bravery, organization, learning, and then decision or doing. BOLD. And I thought, well, that would just be something that would be kind of cool to work with the youth kids for the next 4 weeks or so, about what it means to be bold, about what it means to be brave, about what it means to go out there and to, once you are brave and once you figured it out, is then to organize and to get that squared away in your head of what you want to do, and then learn. Take that and learn about what you want to do, and then to go out and to make it happen and to do it. And so I want to speak a little bit this afternoon about being bold. And in deference to our pastor, I went out and looked this word up last night and couldn't get it pronounced correctly, and so I had our waitress this afternoon at lunchtime, Audaz, A-U-D-A-Z. She said this is a word. Yeah, she said this is a word that is never used in Spanish. So I said, well, how do you describe? She says machismo, and I said, well, okay, that's. But I can't work that into an acronym. So belief, strength, being bold. John, in the book of John 15, verse 18 and 19, he warns, if the world hated you, know that it hated me more before it hated you. What does it mean to be bold? It means to go and step out and to do something that you are not ready to do, or something that you are so ready to do that the world is not ready for. And that was Jesus. Jesus was new. We look at our Bible, we look at the words that we've been spoken to, and we think, well, it's 2,000 years old. It's old hat. Everybody knows about Jesus. Everybody knows about what's happened. But with Christ in the first century AD, this was something radically different. This was something new. So new that it was against the law. So new that you could be put to death. So new that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Roman Empire did not know what to do with these guys. They put them to death, they exiled them, To be bold, to be an apostle and to be bold meant death. Other than the Apostle John, they were all killed for what they believed. Crucified, hung, chopped off heads. It was not a good time to be an apostle, and also not a very good time to be a disciple, because if we know anything about the book of Acts, we know about Stephen. Stephen was the first martyr. Stephen, if you know the story, and I won't go too far into it, but he is addressing the Pharisees. And he's telling them all these things that from the very beginning in the Old Testament, what it meant to be a Jew. And I know what it means to be a Jew, but now this is happening. And as he's speaking, he's getting bolder, he's getting louder, he's getting stronger. And the Pharisees are getting angrier and angrier and angrier because he's speaking the truth to them. And finally they say, that's it, we're done, you're dead. They take him out and they stone him to death. And as he's being stoned to death, there's a young Pharisee there, a man named Saul, who's holding the coats of the men who were throwing the rocks. And one day that man Saul would become the great apostle Paul, again stepping out into boldness without actually knowing that he was stepping out into boldness. But if we continue on in John 5, it also says in verse 19, if you belong to the world, it will love you as it loves its own. See, that's what they love. Is that we are part of the people that are part of the world. Just go along to get along. One of the things about the Youth Workers Convention that really kind of disturbed me was in this room of 2,000 people, they liked, it's like a baby shower. You know, they like going, who's been married the longest? You know, who's been married the youngest? And you know, they start with the youth ministry, you know, who's been in youth ministry 10 years? And you get maybe 35 or 40 people to stand up. And then who's been in it 15 years? And you see about 10 or 11 people stand up. Who's been in it? By the time they get to 40, there's one couple that's standing up out of 2,000 people. But yet, as they go backward, you know, I think there was somebody there that had actually been on staff being paid for 3 weeks. This is their third week. And there were hundreds of those people. And that tells me one of two things. One, that of course they start youth workers very, very young, but also that it is something that is used as a stepping stone. It is something that is used to hire ministry. I used to be a youth pastor, but now I'm an associate pastor. I used to be an associate pastor, but now I'm a senior pastor. They don't stay in it for the long haul. They raise up their kids, they do whatever it is they're going to do, and then they leave. No boldness. Now, I'm not saying that is something that's in the world. I'm not saying that verse 19 applies to them. But what happens is that there's a complacency that goes on. That you start to just see this stagnation. And the boldness goes away, and it just becomes complacency. And that's the other thing that struck me this week, was that we had started to maybe become a little complacent. It's one of the things that the very first things that struck me as we were at this meeting was that they have a youth room across the street. And that's one of the very first things that I think I told Linda was, you know, when we get back, that's one of the first things we have to do is we have to rectify that. We have to get these kids into a room where they can be in a youth room again. I mean, we love having them at the house, but it's time that they move on, and it's time that we move on. We need to be bold in what we do and everything that we do. We need to be all in. We need to be bold in everything that we do. When we were in San Diego, we met lots and lots of different people. We saw lots and lots of different things, and again, the classes were so-so, but there was one class in particular that really stood out in my mind, and that was a class on Bible versus science. And two women were running the class, and it really didn't look like they were all into what they were teaching, because it was a lot of, you know, hyperbole and a lot of things that haven't been proven. And at one point, this young man, and I mean, he was probably no more older than Nate, maybe a little bit older than Nate, raised his hand and he asked the teacher, have you ever heard of this person named Kent Hovind? Now, a lot of you don't know who Kent Hovind is, but he goes by the nickname Dr. Dino. And he is a creation scientist. He takes creation and reasonably proves about how God and creation go hand in hand with all the different things in nature. And he's fascinating. And this lady had never heard of him, of course. But the thing that really got me was we broke up into small groups, and there were 3 or 4 of us together. And there was one guy in this group with a young man that had talked about Dr. Dino. And he kept asking this kid, you know, if you find out that what you believe isn't what you believe, is that going to destroy your faith? had nothing to do with the class. And again, that tells me one of two things. One, the kid stood up and he was bold because he said, it's not going to ruin my faith. But two, there are people out there in this world that spent money to come to these seminars that have a crisis of faith. So that's where we need to be too. Is we need to be that light. We need to be that salt. We need to be that person, whatever it might be, to step out in boldness. As you know, my real job is a mechanic. And there has been a guy at our work over the last few days getting his truck worked on, and then Friday he started to talk about his trailer that he had, and he was looking to get it fixed. And I said, okay, I'll look at it for you. And found several things wrong with it and wrote them all down and gave them to my boss and promptly forgot about them. Well, the boss did, I didn't. But he came yesterday afternoon to talk and to see what was happening. And as I was talking to him about his trailer and talking about the problems and how this, that, and the other thing, he obviously had his mind somewhere else. And I just said, everything okay? And this guy that I've only met a couple times began to tell me his story, how his wife had kicked him out of the house, how they have 2 cars, but his wife won't let him have either one, that the sheriff won't let him anywhere near the house, that he's been living in his truck to save money, that he had to rent a car, and the load that he had that was going to pay for a lot of this stuff had been canceled that afternoon. And as he spoke, I could see that this man needed something a whole lot more than just 2 wheel seals and a light. So I gave him my card, and I said, man, I'll pray for you. I said, we'll pray right now. We got down and we prayed. Now, I don't know where he's at today. I mean, he's Santa Maria somewhere. But it's that stepping out into boldness. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but what I'm saying is that we have people out there in this world that are hurting. They're absolutely dying, and they don't know anything. And though I don't know about witnessing at work for other people, I don't know if that's something that you can do. I mean, I work in a place that's outside most of the time, so it's something that I can do. But it's something when God puts it into your heart, you have to. Don't be afraid to be disappointing. Don't give half a message. No, it's not all Skittles and rainbows. There's lots and lots of things out there that are bad that we need to talk about, that we need to witness to. When you're bold in your witness, it's not always going to be good things. It's not always going to be sunshine. And again, on a bike ride last night, I was thinking about today, and I was thinking about this message, and I was reminded several years ago now. I had the privilege of helping to marry one of the kids that was in a youth group, our youth group back then in the Methodist Church. And what he wanted me to do is he wanted me to give the sermon. It would have been my very first sermon I had ever given. And I was just ecstatic. I was so happy. And as I sat there and pondered what I was going to say, I was thinking, these great things about, this, that. And I thought, no, that's not great, and that's not going to work. And as I was thinking about this, my one grandmother, I can't remember if it was a birthday or what it was, but anyway, I had flown back to Wilmer, Minnesota, and I was back there for a weekend in April. The wedding was in May, and I had not written anything yet. I had not done anything. And as the weekend was going on, and I was contemplating all these different things, and I couldn't think of anything, and then finally, Saturday night, I'm sitting in my hotel room. I think I had just talked to Linda on the phone and wished her a good night. And I had borrowed my daughter Caitlin's iPod, and this was back when the iPods were those little tiny silver things, not much to them. And as I'm dialing through, I'm looking at all the different, I finally figured out how to get the music on there, and I was going through. Well, there was a song on there by a band called Third Day. I don't know if you're familiar with Third Day or not, but they're a great Christian band. And usually they have songs that are a little different than a lot of the ones. And there was a song on there called When the Rain Comes. And it's kind of funny, if you've ever heard the song, it starts out with the same kind of thing like Jingle Bells. It almost sounds like a Christmas song. You hear the ching, 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 ching. But as they're singing, the singer is talking about when the rains come, I will be there to hold you. When the storm rages, I'll hold you until the rain is over. That gave me my inspiration for Ryan and Sarah's sermon. That you're not always going to be in a place that's going to be great. That you're not always going to be in a place that is beautiful. The rain is going to come. And when it does, who are we going to talk to? Who are we going to hold on to? We're going to hold on to Dr. Phil. We're going to talk on to Dr. Laura, Oprah maybe. Who are we going to go to? No. It's God. It has to be God. It can't be anyone else. Because no one else can hold you the way God can. No one else knows how to hold you the way God can. Biblical boldness. The examples of biblical boldness. I talked about Stephen. Let's talk about Peter for a second. Now, Peter, if you know anything at all about Peter in the Bible, he was ready, aim, fire. No, he was ready, fire, aim. Before the crucifixion, he was all over the map. He had no clue. He was the apostle of Jesus' group. He was the man that was called to go be what? Fishers of men. And yet in the beginning, I don't think he could have caught a fish, let alone fishers of men. At one point, after Jesus announced that he was going to have to die, what did Peter say? Peter said, never. No, it won't happen. And Jesus had to rebuke him. Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. Because he didn't understand, he didn't know, he didn't get it. And the second part of the boldness, the O part of this, is going to be the organization and keeping it together and keeping it straight. And so as I was listening and thinking about Paul and all these different things, it wasn't until Acts, it wasn't until the resurrection that he really started to get it together again and started to figure out what it was that he needed to do. And better yet, he started to figure out what God needed him to do. And that was when, in Acts 4, he was giving the speech, and the Pharisees told him to be quiet, and he couldn't stop. He couldn't stop talking. He just kept talking in that boldness, because he had that second part of boldness. He had that organization. He had the O. We went to a football game Friday night. Lynn and I went to Rigetti versus Arroyo Grande, and it was a blowout, 45-0, Arroyo Grande. It's fun to watch. We get there really early. We get there before the buses get there. No, we get there. The JV game is playing, and we're watching that, and that too was a blowout. And then we're sitting there having dinner and just kind of conversation about different stuff. And as we're sitting there, the players are coming out on the field, and they're stretching. And first it's 4 or 5, and then it's 8 or 9, and then pretty soon the teams are starting to spread out. You've got the defensive guys warming up, and then you've got the other guys over here warming up. Well, we had the privilege of watching the punters and long snappers right in front of us. Kids are snapping the ball, was it 15 yards, 10 yards? It's huge, it's a very long distance. And then the punters punting. And the special teams coach is standing there telling the guys, among other things, keep your eye on the ball. Now, I've heard that in baseball. I mean, you got to keep your eye on the ball to hit the ball, clutch it, anything like that. Golf, same way. You lift your head, you can't hit the golf ball. If you do hit the golf ball, it doesn't go very great. Keep your eye on the ball. But I would think football, I think it's gigantic. How can you not keep your eye on the ball? Until I started watching the mechanics of it. They have to catch the ball, okay? They're not sure exactly where that ball is coming. It may be high, it may be low, maybe off to the side. Then they have to turn it, because if you kick the ball with the laces, it's going to go off to the side. Then they have to actually kick the ball a great enough distance to where they can actually be a punter. I mean, if you've ever tried to kick a football, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Plus the fact that they have pads and a helmet and all these other things going on. And oh, by the way, you've got at least 7 guys coming after you trying to get your ball. And all of this within a whole time of what, 5 seconds? Maybe? It just happens like that. So you want to talk about organized, and you want to talk about focused. A punter. Now that's somebody who's focused. But that's what we need to be. Because once we figure out that we are bold, then we need to work on the O. We need to work on the organization. Being bold also comes with keeping that eye on the ball. You have to spin it, you have to kick it, and then of course you have to avoid being blocked. In the early part of the Bible, we also read about different people in their organization. And I'm talking about the early part of the Bible, I'm talking about the Old Testament now. As we talk about people that were focused, I guess the only person, there's a couple of names that come to mind, and one that was a positive focus was Joseph. If we remember anything about Joseph in the Bible, he was someone who was focused on what God wanted. And God blessed him with everything that he had. I cannot honestly think of one time except for the fact that he was the coat of many colors and he kind of gave his brothers a hard time as a younger man. But once he got into Egypt, once he got focused, once he got his job, he was focused on keeping his family but doing his job and doing it in a way that was godly in manner. I mean, he was a man who was out of place. He was a Hebrew in Egypt. But yet as a slave, and then as a prisoner, and then as someone who rose up through the ranks with the Pharaoh, he was someone who kept his mind on what he was doing, and he was rewarded for what he did. Daniel is another person. Daniel was someone who was put into exile in Babylon, along with about 60,000 other Jews. And as he was taken as a young man into the court of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was told that you will be taught many things. You show a great promise in learning, and you show a great promise in education and in the way that you can speak. And so I'll tell you what, we're going to make you one of these college graduates, one of the college graduates of Babylon. Come on, let's go. And he said, okay, me and my friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we'll go do that too. But we're not going to eat the food you have. We're not going to dishonor our Lord by eating the rich food and the wine. They said, we're going to continue to honor our God. We're going to continue to stay organized. We're going to continue to stay focused. We're going to continue to keep our eye on the ball. And we're going to continue to do what God wants us to do. And if you know anything about the book of Daniel, you know that that was something that happened, that he rose up through the ranks. Again, a man who was a Jew in a foreign country, and not only in a foreign country, but it went from Babylonians to Medo-Persians to Assyrians. I mean, it went, you had governments changing constantly back there. People conquering other countries, civilizations conquering other civilizations, and yet Daniel was always being honorable to God, no matter what. I mean, we know the story of the lion's den. We know the story of all these other things, but the visions that Daniel was having, Daniel had some crazy visions in the latter part of the book. So much so that he was praying to God, and God would send these people to him because he was that focused and because they knew that he had to write that book. And again, this is something that's a historical fact, that the book of Daniel was actually believed to have been written somewhere around the 6th century AD, because of the prophecies that were in it, that were so accurate that the people of the time thought there's no way that this could have been any kind of a biblical book. No way. As a matter of fact, for 150 years in Germany, in the seminaries in Germany, wouldn't even teach the book of Daniel. They said, no way, that's not even a book in the Bible. And it's funny how God brings our sight back, how God will make us put our eye back on that ball. Because for 150 years in those German seminaries that was going on, then about 1947, a little shepherd boy, throwing rocks in Qumran, throws a rock into a cave and hears this jar break. And as he goes into this cave and pulls out, he finds these pots that are just stuffed full of prophecy, just stuffed full of these scrolls. And as the scientists unearth all this stuff and start looking at all this stuff, they find almost a complete book of Daniel, written about 100 AD, maybe, a copy, almost word for word. Jesus Christ himself quotes from the book of Daniel. So God has a way of keeping our eye on the ball, even when we don't want to keep our eye on the ball. Chief priests, Pharisees, people in our workplace, whatever it might be. There's going to be people that are all the time going to be trying to tell us to stop, are going to try to tell us to be quiet, are going to try to tell us that we need to change what we're doing. but we can't. And the last example I'll give, because time is almost up here, is what we're doing right here, right now. For most of us that are in this room, we can remember meeting in a house, out in the backyard, in the rain sometimes, crammed together into a living room, stepping out into boldness, stepping out into faith, stepping out into what we don't know, but we're stepping out. And look at us now. We have insurance, we have a church, we have incorporation. I mean, we've come a long way in a little over a year. And why is that? Because we talked to people and they said, you can't do this. We talked to people and said, this can't be done. I've actually talked to people and said, you can't do this. You can't start your own church. I thought, you can't? Sure you can. If you step out into boldness. If you step out into where God wants us to go. Because that's the thing, is that how do we know we're stepping out into where God wants us to be? Well, you look at blessings. You look at the things that come with what we have. Now, I know this isn't really a blessing, but it is. And I'll tell you this story really quick. One of the things that we did, again, stepping out into boldness, was we handed out water this year again at the Harvest Festival, which was a terrific success. We had a great time, lots of people. We had a really, really good time. But one of the things that we had to do was we had to transport water from grocery stores to the job site, to the site of where we were at. And usually I used to do that in this beat up old Chevy pickup truck, this blue little Chevy Love pickup that couldn't handle a lot of water at once. And so I'd have to make several trips. And I would be late into the night getting home, and Linda would be worried about me. And this year, though, God had blessed us with a brand new pickup that's big, that can handle all the water at one time. Now, am I saying that's a blessing from this? No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that we look at what God gives us. And it's actually David's wife that actually pointed out. She says, see, God gave you a pickup. Now, you can use it. So, as we close, I just want you to know that you're bold. That what we're doing, meeting on a Sunday afternoon, it may not seem like something that's radical. It may not seem like something that is earth-shattering or earth-moving, but it is. Because what we are people that believe the Bible. We are people of the book, as we are called. That we don't hold to any doctrine other than that of God and that of His 66 books written by about 40 or so people over about 1,500 years. That from the littlest kids to the youth kids to us to the adults, we are all under one umbrella, and that is the umbrella of God. And that if that were ever to change, then we would have to change. But it's not going to. Through the bold leadership of our pastor, Reuben, through David's leading of worship and singing, through you guys coming in that time, we're all stepping out into boldness. And for that, I thank you.